So today we're going to have a closer look at the Boss Metal Zone pedal. Well, maybe not that close. This pedal, which is infamous for sounding like crap, actually has the potential to sound pretty good. If you use this pedal through the effects loop instead of going into the guitar input, you can get a much more usable tone. Now, I happen to have a pedal laying around. It was given to me from a friend of mine like years ago. Maybe I used it a couple times, but I certainly haven't used it recently. I was planning on selling it, but I noticed these videos popping up, so I thought I'd give it a try. And sure enough, going through the effects loop of my amp, the tone is pretty solid. However, I don't really record with my amp. I actually record going directly into my interface and then using amp sims and cab sims. So that got me thinking, I wonder if the Metal Zone would do pretty good with cab sims. Here's what I'll say. If you have a DAW that doesn't allow you to download and install third-party plugins, then something like the Metal Zone could be useful to you for getting a metal tone. However, you are going to need some kind of cab simulation that comes with your DAW. But if you can download and install third-party plugins, I would recommend doing that because there's a lot of great free tools out there that I think you can get a better metal tone with than something like this. If you do happen to like the tone of the Metal Zone, or you're just curious how to use it with your DAW, I'll go ahead and show you how I did that. Okay, so when I first started messing around with the Metal Zone pedal, my initial idea was to try combining it with the signal chain that I've been able to develop with the free plugins that I downloaded. These are the plugins I use for my standard guitar tone. If you look here, here's the amp sim that I'm using. So at this point in the chain, a little more than halfway, this is where the signal is actually distorted. So the problem is when we record with the Metal Zone, our guitar is going into the Metal Zone, and from that into our interface, so our direct signal is already distorted. So in a way, we're starting at this point in the chain, which means we've only got 2 more plugins to apply afterwards. I tried that out, and ultimately I just didn't like the tone of the Metal Zone as much as what I've been able to achieve with these free plugins. But then I got a comment fairly recently of someone who was asking about making a metal tone using stock plugins in GarageBand. And since I've got Logic Pro, the two softwares share a lot of the same plugins. So I thought it'd be kind of fun to revisit some of these plugins that I haven't used in a while and see if I could make a good tone. You can get, some kind of metal-esque tone with the stock plugins in Logic. But when you add the Metal Zone into the picture, I think the Metal Zone is actually even better. So to clarify, Metal Zone, not as good as the free plugins you can download, but if you can't download free plugins, the Metal Zone might be better than what you can get with stock plugins. So that's what we're going to do. I decided to focus on just using stock plugins. So again, I recorded the guitar signal. Here's what the Metal Zone signal sounds like on its own. So you can hear it's not pleasant, and that's because it's not going through any kind of cab. This would be the same thing if you were to run your DI signal through an amp sim and not have a cabinet. So you have to have some kind of cabinet simulation that comes stock with your DAW. In Logic Pro and GarageBand, we've got the Amp Designer. It tends to have this kind of crispy digital quality that doesn't sound very good. So it is difficult to work with, but it's a pretty cool plugin. We're going to want to start with our cab, and I kind of compared this to some references, and I felt like the Brown 4x12 was the best cab, and I'm using the condenser mic, and I've got it positioned all the way into the center and pulled back a little more than halfway, maybe about 70% of the way. Now for the amp head, we actually want to bypass this because you can get like a decent tone with the amp head, but you're starting to get back into the infamous hated Metal Zone tone, because remember, the Metal Zone going in front of your amp through your guitar signal, that's the tone that everyone sort of likes to make fun of, and that's kind of what you're going to get if you mess with the amp head. So we actually want to bypass that to simulate more of that effects loop kind of sound. So we're going to pick this transparent preamp. So this is going to be just our signal going into the cab. So here is what that sounds like. So you can hear it's much more pleasant, and it sounds much more like a guitar tone. Now you'll notice the transparent preamp does have some EQ settings here. You can play with this stuff, but for the most part, I just left that alone. Now, I should mention when I recorded the guitar, I did record with this plugin engaged, so I didn't record with that harsh digital sound. I activated this plugin with the cab, and that's what my guitar tone sounded like when I was recording it. And as I was recording it, remember you've got some options with the metal zone pedal itself for shaping the tone because it's got some knobs to adjust the EQ. So it's really important to have some kind of reference. If you look at this white track here, this is my reference. This is a mastered guitar tone. So this is basically what a final guitar tone should sound like. You can hear it's really tight and really vicious. So as I was recording, I was trying to adjust the knobs to come up with a metal zone tone that, man, I keep saying that, metal zone tone. But to come up with a tone that was as close as possible to that. And you're not going to get an exact match, but you just want to dial in something that's going to be a good starting point to work with. So if we listen to our tone, it's not bad. Definitely lacks some of the bright end, but I didn't want to boost it too much because I didn't want it to be too harsh from the get-go. And it's a little woofy, but we can carve some of that stuff out, which is what we're going to do. So we've got kind of a good starting point. And the only other plugin we're going to use is now just a graphic EQ. There's two ways I like to use EQ. In the editing phase, what we're doing right now, I'm using the EQ purely just to shape the tone. This is going to help it with the mix, but I'm not actually mixing right now. I'm just trying to shape the tone into something that's more usable. And then later in the mix, we'll use EQ to help it sit better with the other instruments. Around 800 hertz, there's kind of some honky frequencies going on. It's kind of like this hockaloogie frequency. You get this kind of sort of sound. Yeah, so I cut quite a bit of that out. And then I wanted to tighten up the low end, so I tried to look for some woofy frequencies. I found something around 230. And you can notice I'm using a wider band here because I want to affect the majority of the low end. I'm targeting like the main woofy spot, but then I'm kind of spreading it out so that the entire low end is just a little bit tighter. So I'm dipping that down a little bit. I'm also tightening the low end by adding a high pass filter. And then the last thing I like to do is just find a good frequency and give that a little boost. So I was just looking for something in the mid-range. Again, it's a fairly wide EQ band, and just an area that sounds good and giving that a little boost so we can hear what this is doing. You can just hear that it tightens up the tone and cleans it up. It's a lot easier to listen to. I did that for both of the rhythm guitars, and then for the lead guitars, we're going to do something just a little bit different. So normally, with lead guitar, you want there to be separation from your lead and your rhythm tracks, because if you just use the same amp and the same cab, then the lead guitars can kind of get buried in your rhythm tones, and they don't really stick out. So an easy way to make them stick out is just to use a different amp. But since in this example, the Metal Zone plugin basically is our amp, I didn't really have a way to change that. So the next best thing you can do is change the cab. So we come back to this plugin, and you'll notice instead of the brown 4x12, now I'm using this turbo 4x12. But other than that, everything else is the same. And then for the EQ, I'm basically doing the exact same type of moves, but just on different frequencies. So I've got two lead guitars, and they're playing harmony, and I knew they were both going to be mono, so just to give them a little bit of separation, I boosted a different good frequency for each of them. So yeah, so here's what the lead guitar sounds like. And then you add the harmony with that. And it sounds good. I mean, harmony guitars are like a classic staple of heavy metal. It's pretty hard to mess them up, but these are some things you can do to make them work better together. That's really all there is to the signal chain. So all we're going to do now is just edit our guitars. You can see I've just got some little fades here, and that's just to kind of tighten it up for those abrupt stops, just so there's not like a lot of background noise and things happening. So just a little polish on the performance. And then you're going to bounce each individual track down into a single audio file, and that's basically your tone. Then you bring it into a new project where you would mix it. That's pretty much it. That's how you can get a metal tone with the Metal Zone. I hope this video was helpful to you guys, or at least interesting. Thanks for watching. Until next time.